Sudan is facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis amid a brutal war waged by the RSF rebels. The government in Khartoum has accused the United Arab Emirates of backing this rebel group. So why is the UAE backing a rebel group committing genocidal atrocities in Sudan? A new book has been published about the brutal colonial rule by Germany in parts of Africa. Now, did you know the first genocide in the 20th century was actually committed by Germany in Africa? For more on how the United Arab Emirates is meddling in Sudan, we have contacted David Hundain. He is the founder of the West Africa Weekly. And to discuss German atrocities in Africa, we are joined by Walter Boyer. He is the chairman of the African Books Collective, a worldwide marketing and distribution outlet for books from Africa. The current civil war in Sudan broke out on April 15, 2023, following a power struggle between Sudanese Army Chief Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who is also the president of the Transitional Sovereign Council, and Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, the commander of the notorious paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, known by its acronym RSF. Since the war started, estimates indicate that almost 25,000 people have been killed. Additionally, 10.2 million Sudanese people have been displaced within the country or have fled to neighboring countries. UN experts say RSF rebels have been committing ethnic killings and other crimes. The Sudanese government has urged the international community to designate the RSF rebels as a terrorist group because they are committing ethnic cleansing and genocide. Sudan has accused the United Arab Emirates of supporting the RSF. So why is the UAE supporting this brutal rebel group in Sudan?
UAE meddling in Sudan. Sudan recently announced the cancellation of a $6 billion deal with the United Arab Emirates to develop a new port and linked enterprise zone on the Red Sea coast. This move came over accusations that the United Arab Emirates is backing rebels in their country.
In a recent interview with Al Jazeera, Sudan's leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said the foreign-backed RSF rebels have ignited the humanitarian catastrophe in the country.
No one wants to say that this is the rebel rapid support forces who are causing the famine and starving some areas in Darfur and destroying the Gezira scheme. Frankly speaking, those who talk about famine must talk about its causes and about the militias responsible for it.
In a letter to the United Nations Security Council President last October, Sudan presented what it described as new evidence of UAE's military, financial and logistical support for the RSF rebels. Weeks later, Sudan cancelled its multi-billion-dollar deal with the UAE. Now, what is your opinion on this move by Sudan to cancel their deal with the UAE?
In my opinion, it absolutely is justified. There is a significant amount of open source intelligence out there to suggest that the United Arab Emirates is actively supporting the so-called Rapid Support Forces in their war against the Sudanese government. I believe it was sometime in August. It was a plane, a cargo plane, a military cargo plane from the UAE was seen, was photographed by satellites in Chad, which is right next to Sudan, and the UAE government claimed that it was humanitarian supplies that were being supplied to the affected areas in Sudan. However, the area of Chad where this plane was photographed was very close to an area of Sudan which is actually being occupied and controlled by the RSF. So it's not too much of a stretch to suggest that the UAE government has actually been caught actively arming, funding, and rendering support to the RSF. So if you are the Sudanese government, there's no reason to reward the UAE for actively supporting the opposing entity in a war against the recognized legitimate government of the country.
Gold has been one of the main drivers of the Sudan conflict. The UAE is the main beneficiary of this trade. It receives nearly all the gold smuggled from Sudan and has become a hub for laundering trafficked gold into the global market. Experts say part of the UAE's motivation for funding the devastating hostilities is to guarantee its access to Sudanese land, seaports, and mineral and agricultural resources.
In this sort of situation where there's an opportunity to potentially fund an entity that could, in theory, seize control of an entire country and then become beholden to you, that would vastly increase the amount of access that you have, not just to the gold in Sudan, but to every other thing that Sudan has to offer. Sudan, like the rest of Africa, is very, very rich in mineral resources. And it's also located in a sort of strategic position between the sub-Saharan African world and the Arab and Middle Eastern world. So there are many reasons why the UAE would want to potentially sort of become a de facto sort of neo-colonial influence on Sudan. Bear in mind that the UAE obviously is very close allies with NATO, with the EU, with the US government. So these guys have seen all these other actors going around the world doing similar things, instigating crises, funding factions in civil conflicts, and basically seizing control of the resource endowments of entire countries using these underhanded means. So I'm guessing they are trying to stamp their, mark their own entry into the big time by doing what the big boys already do across the African continent.
According to the Guardian newspaper, British government officials attempted to suppress criticism of the United Arab Emirates and its role in supplying arms to the RSF militia waging a campaign of ethnic cleansing in Sudan. Protests have been held outside the UAE embassy in London to slam the Persian Gulf country over its role in supporting the RSF rebels.
The reason we're outside of the UAE embassy today is because the UAE is also highly complicit in funding the RSF. There have been massacres that have been committed throughout Sudan, especially over the last year, and by September 2.5 million are estimated to die from food impoverishment.
There is no doubt that RSF rebels are committing atrocities in Sudan due to the support Western countries provide to the UAE government that backs these rebels. So why are Western countries indirectly backing the rebels and terrorists committing crimes against the people of Sudan?
Well, that's because the interests of the Western countries and the interests of the UAE are not very different. As I said, the UAE is trying to become a neo-colonial influence on Sudan. UAE is trying to become a puppeteer that is controlling Sudan, and in doing so, gaining access to the resource endowment and the geostrategic importance of the country. The Western countries already do this on a much larger scale. They do it across most of Africa, across much of Asia and South America. So for them, apart from the fact that UAE obviously is an important ally for them in the Middle East, where obviously it's important for them to have allies, backing their major friend in the region, that is Israel. So that is one reason why they will be aligned with the UAE. Another major reason is that it's not in their interest for an African country to demonstrate that it can seize control of its own mineral wealth and it can develop independently. It's in their interest for African countries to remain constantly and perennially at war. That is of direct benefit to the Western world, and that is how the Western world has built its prosperity that it has had over the past half century or even more.
Last September, the African Union held talks with officials in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia seeking support to end the war in Sudan and reach an immediate ceasefire there. Experts believe African countries should pile more pressure on UAE to stop meddling in Sudan.
I think the most immediate and the most compelling step that African countries could take will be something similar to what the Gulf countries did in the 1970s, where there was a boycott of Israel and a Western oil boycott. So something similar. I think AU member states should organize a boycott of the UAE, especially Dubai. Right, because presently Dubai functions as a de facto hub for for African wealth, if you like. So be it conflicts, minerals, be it wealthy Africans who choose to live in Dubai and operate their businesses in Africa from Dubai, all sorts of things relating to Africa and its economy have a significant presence in Dubai right now. There's a large part of Dubai's economy that is directly built off of Africa. Even the national airline, what's it called, Emirates, is able to be as big as it is in a very large part because of the fact that it has a very strong presence across the African continent and is able to link much of the African continent to the world via Dubai as a hub. So if AU member states were to organize a total boycott of the UAE, an economic boycott, an economic and political boycott of the UAE, it will hit the UAE in its pockets, which is where it hurts.
There has been a long-term strategy by imperialist powers to meddle in Sudan, which was once the largest country in Africa before South Sudan, backed by Zionists and Western powers, seceded in 2011. RSF militia leader Mohammed Dagalo is said to be close to the Israeli regime's notorious Mossad spy agency. Experts believe there is a link between the current conflict in Sudan and the wider US and Israeli agenda for energy resources control and balkanization of parts of Africa and the Muslim world. What's your take on this viewpoint?
The American foreign policy doctrine, which is followed by the rest of the NATO and G7 member states, is that any country in the global south, which is a country that is not under the direct and immediate control, political control of the US and its allies, and this country has crude oil, natural gas, uranium, anything that can power industrialization and growth. And this country is a geographically large country. This country should be broken up, should be balkanized. It should be turned into like those little Pacific island states which always vote at the UN in the direction that the US is voting, right? That's how the US wants countries in the global south. And that's what we're seeing across Africa. So where in Somalia, for example, there's a whole agenda now that Somalia should be broken up into 5 or 6 states. In Nigeria, there's a similar thing. There are all sorts of secessionist movements which are funded by the Israeli intelligence services and the American intelligence services that, Nigeria should be broken up into 5 or 6 countries. In Sudan, obviously, as you mentioned, it's already been broken up into North Sudan and South Sudan. Potentially could be broken up even further. Libya as well has, even though it's on paper remains one country, but, to all intents and purposes has been balkanized as well. There are several agendas like that for countries in the global south and across the Asian and Muslim world which have these energy resources.
Well, no doubt there is need for vigilance in Africa and in Muslim countries to counter the threats posed by the US and the Israeli regime and their allies. I would like to thank our guest, David Hundain, for his incisive analysis today. We now take a short break before our next topic on crimes committed by Germany in Africa. Stay with us.
German atrocities in Africa.
The brutal German colonial empire occupied several parts of Africa from 1884 until the end of the First World War in 1918. For over 3 decades, the German colonial administration committed unprecedented atrocities against Africans resisting colonialism. 3 of these atrocities stand out from the others. First, in present-day Namibia, during the war against the Herero, which is today widely regarded as the first genocide of the 20th century, German colonial troops mercilessly killed thousands of resistance fighters. The second atrocity is the war against Tinama, another group that stood up to resist German rule in Namibia almost immediately after the Herero uprising. During the war against these populations, resisting colonial forces, at least 65,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama lost their lives. The third atrocity occurred during the war against the Maji resistance in the so-called German East Africa. Experts estimate that up to 300,000 members of the indigenous populations of present-day Tanzania, Burundi, and Rwanda were massacred during the resistance against German colonial rule between 1905 and 1907. So why is Germany refusing to pay reparations and offer proper apologies to the people of Africa for its atrocities in the continent?
Germany, like other European powers, was a brutal colonial force in Africa. However, this colonial past is less frequently recounted compared to the histories of other imperial powers.
A descendant of one of those who survived the genocide perpetrated by Germans against Namibians speaks here.
The Germans gave my grandmother hardship. She grew up among foreign people. She was forced to speak a foreign language. And we are living in poverty because of what they did to us at the time. Now we want them to restore our dignity. Reparations must come, and we want our land back.
A new book titled The Long Shadow of German Colonialism, Amnesia, Denialism and Revisionism by Henning Melba seeks to examine the history of German colonialism in Africa. The book also highlights the ways German colonial legacy manifests itself in the country, society, politics, and the media. Now, first question to Walter Boyer, how important is this book at this point in time?
This book is very important and has come at the right time. It is especially important because it's written by Henning Melba, who is also a friend of mine, who has a lot of experience and worked very closely with SWAPO in Namibia, and therefore is very much aware of the history of Namibia and what took place in Namibia, constituting the first genocide. So it's the appropriate time because also the young people in Germany must interrogate the history and hold their leaders accountable for what transpired. So it's a very, very important book now because we see a resurgence of ideas that wish to somehow justify colonialism and even demand for recolonization, as Peter Thiel, for instance, has been advocating, and other ex-military leaders in France, for instance, in respect of the revolution in the Sahel region. So this is a very, very important book, and it couldn't come at a better time.
The resistance against German colonial rule in Africa led to the genocide of hundreds of thousands of Africans. Unfortunately, German atrocities in Africa get little attention compared to the crimes committed by other European colonial powers.
I think there are several reasons. The first one, I think, is that at the time of independence, we were not dealing with German colonialism. We were fighting against colonialism that the present colonial regimes, the British, the French, the Portuguese, etc. But I think that another reason is that, African people are very, very generous, very kind people. So there was this idea that let bygones be bygones, that the Germany had been defeated, and so that was the end of it.
In 2015, the German government acknowledged that the conflict against the Ova Herero and Nama in present-day Namibia amounted to genocide. Since that time, negotiations between Germany and Namibia have been ongoing, yet reparations remain a subject of debate and dispute. Germany has paid over 100 billion euros to alleged victims and descendants of the so-called Holocaust. However, Germany has so far refused to accept a similar approach towards African people.
Clearly, this is a racist approach, and black lives do not matter at all for the German government. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree entirely that this is a manifestation of the racism that surrounds the whole question of reparations. It goes to show that the Germans think that the lives of the African people in Namibia are not the same worth as the lives of the other people, for instance, in Germany, where they paid so much more in terms of reparations for the Holocaust to the Israelis, billions of dollars. This is racism, pure and simple. And another thing, for instance, is in the case of Maji Maji, for instance, They even refused to call it a war. Because you see, when we talk about reparations, it's a war situation. So you talk about reparations for war damages and so on. But in this case, it's always referred to as a rebellion. And a rebellion does not have the same status as a war. So a rebellion, you put it down, but that's the end of it. But a war, there are war prisoners, there's war reparations. So to call it less than a war is to already diminish the importance of that struggle of the African people for their dignity, for their independence, for their sovereignty, which again is the fundamental problem of racism in Western societies.
Germany's president was in Tanzania last year, where he issued what was termed as an apology for the atrocities committed by his country during the colonial rule over this African nation. Tanzanians say that Germany's apology alone is not enough. The issue of reparations and financial compensation for colonialism and its related atrocities needs to be addressed.
I think this is a question that, again, as I said, African countries have to confront with and not just play what I can say kind of polite politics where these European ex-colonial authorities can get away with it. But I think it's important also to notice here that while this country, Germany, so-called apologized for its crimes in Namibia, but is continuing the same crimes, supporting the same crimes in Israel, in Gaza. So it is extremely informative here that Germany, which caused so much pain in the Holocaust, is supplying weapons to Israelis to commit exactly the same crimes of ethnic cleansing in Gaza, as it did tried it first in Africa, in Namibia, in Tanganyika, where using arson, it just wiped out, used the fire to totally destroy the farms, the sources of livelihood of the people, and therefore kill them by starvation.
In 2018, Gunther Nook, then Germany's Commissioner for Africa, presented his so-called voluntary colonialism plan for Africa. Nook previously glorified European colonialism in Africa. Now, it's quite clear that many descendants of colonialists have not changed their genocidal mindset. Do you think European powers such as Germany are currently pursuing similar policies of colonialism of their ancestors?
I think one have to realize that the present leaders in Germany are not in 1918 or 1945. These are leaders who we can actually say are young leaders, in the sense that they are not part of the former German colonial power, colonial authority, colonial society. But the mere fact that they're behaving exactly the same way, they are not ready to accept the responsibility, puts them in the same category as their ancestors.
Well, unfortunately, our time is over for today. I would like to thank our guest, Walter Boyer, for his insight on crimes committed by Germany in Africa. And that's it for this week's edition of Africa Today. It's always great having you watch the show. You can watch this episode on our previous shows on our website, presstv.ir. On behalf of the crew, it's Momo Barakenya saying goodbye for now.